Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. So today it's story time. So today the story is how my family and myself, we got kicked out of our house by an evil spirit, a ghost. And yes, we sure did. So grab a coffee or tea, get cozy with me, and let's get into it. So this is kind of controversial. I don't like talking about this with just people. I usually reserve it for people that have gotten used to my weirdness. But I did warn you, I am weird. So I apologize if this makes you uncomfortable. I know a lot of people don't believe in this stuff, but I swear to you, this happened. It really did. And that was part of our life that happened. And I am a spirit sensitive. I've got several ghost stories that I can tell you about. Um, and my whole family is. We all have some kind of ability. But yes, I am a spirit sensitive. So yes, this is going to be a weird video. So let's get into it. Grab a coffee or tea and get cozy with me. All right. So this was in 1974. I was 6 years old, and this was in Tucson, Arizona, on a street called Kaya Capella. And this street it was kind of a subdivision of its time. The house was built in the 1950s. It was your basic ranch style brick home. And that's pretty much most of the houses there. That's how they were. And 4 bedroom, 2 bath. And it was my grandma, my uncle, my mom, brother, sister, then me. So there were 6 of us living in this house. And my uncle was only 5 years older than me. So he was 11 years old. So he was still a boy. My grandma called him her menopause baby. So we moved into this house, and we were only there 4 months before we had to leave. But the weird thing is I have memories of this house as if it was a lifetime. And I was only 6 years old, but I have several memories of this house. And there was nothing spectacular about it. It wasn't some weird Gothic style kind of house. It was your average brick ranch style house. So we move in, and, within a week or so, or even sooner, the water faucets, the water started coming on. Okay. Plumbing problems. And then the lights started flickering and coming on and off. Electrical problems. Okay. And then the washer and dryer would turn on. And then the toilet would flush. And then during all of this, my mom's bedroom. Now, the floor plan of this house, and I'm gonna tell you the floor plan. It is important for a story later. So the floor plan was basic. It was living room, dining area, kitchen, and then there was a hallway off the living room, and it was bedroom, 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 bathroom. So my mom's bedroom was the furthest back of the house, but it faced the street. So her bedroom was always freezing cold. It was always cold. This is Tucson, in the summer, it could get 110, 115 degrees. So it was always very cold in there. It was in the 50s in that house, just very, very cold. There was no central air back then. We had a swamp cooler, which uses recycled air and water to make it cooler, but it was not central air. And but her room was always very, very cold, and the rest of the house would be regular. So I distinctly remember this. I was in charge. We had a fish tank, and I was in charge of feeding the fish. I took it very seriously. Yes. And in one night, all of our angelfish died. I was devastated because I thought I did something wrong, like I overfed them or something. And no, it was like 3 or 4 of them, all of our angelfish. We had goldfish and angelfish, and all of our angelfish died in one night. And then my grandma saw a man, a big, large man, walking down the hallway, wearing a Hawaiian shirt, walking down the hallway. And then one night, the adults were sitting in the living room. The kids were in bed. The adults were in the living room. And my brother comes walking out of his room. And he was walking like disjointed, like this, just very like this. And his eyes were huge. And he's walking like this. And he walks up and he's standing there. And he starts talking to the adults. And it was Grandma, my mom, and my Aunt Judy. Aunt Judy lived in Tucson as well. She just didn't live with us, but she was visiting. And he starts talking to them in a different language. And it was not Spanish. It was not Mexican. It was completely different language that to this day, they still don't know what it was. And he's just blah, 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 blah. And then he turns around and he's walking like this back to his room and shuts the door, goes back to bed. Next day, they asked him about it, and he didn't know what they were talking about, had no idea. And then my mom got sick. I remember this because I was very worried about her, and she kept going to different doctors, and they could not figure out what was wrong with her. And they were thinking that it was some kind of blood disorder. And she started losing a lot of weight. She didn't want to leave her room. She was very just tired and lethargic and just didn't want to leave her room. I remember being very worried about her. And my mom was only like 4'10", 4'11". She'll say she was 5 foot, but no, she was about 4'10", 4'11". And she didn't have weight to lose. She was already tiny, but yeah, she started losing weight. And I remember the house was just very uncomfortable to be in. It was just weird. And there was a figurine that we have. My mom did ceramics, and she did one of the Virgin Mary with a crown, and it came crashing to the floor. And that thing was heavy. It wasn't sitting like on a small, it was on a desk. Or a dresser. I think it was in Grandma's room, and it came crashing to the floor. And then one night they were laying in Grandma's room watching TV, and one of them had the robe laying on the bed, and the robe just slid off the bed. Okay. Well, then it picked itself back up and went back on the bed. So, and it was just going on and on. And so out of desperation, Grandma and Aunt Judy and my mom went to an instructor of parapsychology at the University of Arizona, and was trying to get guidance on what to do. Like, do we exercise the house? What do we do? And he said, truly, this sounds demonic. It doesn't sound like it's it doesn't sound like this is just a regular spirit. It sounds evil because of the coldness in the room, and how my mom is sick, because that's the room she slept in. So he said it's going to get worse, but the final straw needs to be if it attacks the children. And so one night the adults got together, and they were using an Ouija board, and they were asking it questions, and they asked it, "Are you going to harm the children?" And the planchette, is that what it's called? A planchette went straight to yes, and then the board just flew off the table. So I remember that the adults were talking about how we were going to go camping, and they were loading up the station wagon. We had one of those yellow station wagons with the wood panels on the side. Remember those? And they were loading up the car and for just in case. And well, so my uncle, he comes running out of his room and he had an adult sized red handprint on his face where something hit him and hit him hard. It bruised him. That was it. That was it. We moved out. We didn't just leave the house, we left the state. We drove all the way back to Neosho, Missouri. It took a couple days, but that's where my Aunt June was, and that's where we went back to Neosho. Like in all my other stories, I talk about how we always go back to Neosho. Well, we did. And so we did, and it was just very traumatizing. I remember I lived in Pennsylvania. I turned 8 years old in Pennsylvania. It was in a suburb outside of Philly. We lived there for a short time, and I remember that something crashed to the floor, and I immediately thought, "Oh no, we're going to have that happen to us again." And no, it was just it was someone, I forgot who it was, dropped something. And then my brother always had night terrors after that. He would uh, wake up screaming about a house on fire, and he would sleepwalk and, talk in his sleep and stuff. So he had issues. And then my sister she became very inward, didn't really express what we went through, but it scarred us, all three of us kids. It scarred us. And it scarred my uncle as well. But so fast forward, and it's 1992 or 1993, 93. And I got stationed. I'm in the Air Force. I got stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson. I was a little disappointed because I had lived off and on in Tucson since I was 5 years old. 5, I went back when I was 15, and I went back again when I was 20. And in fact, I went to MEPS to join up to get the physical and all that in Phoenix. So I was living in Tucson when I joined the Air Force. So I was disappointed to go back to a place I knew very, very well. But I'd been there a year, and my uncle was in town visiting, and we decided to go back to drive by that house. And so I was 26, I do believe. I was 25 or 26. And we go driving by that house, and on a whim, we pulled into the driveway. And I'm in uniform. I had night shift, so it was like midday. I didn't have to be into work until 3 p.m. So it was like 11, 12 o'clock. And we pull in, and I notice that the front of the house where my mom's old bedroom was just boxes. There was no curtains on the windows. There was boxes stacked in there. And so I'm like, I'm gonna go knock on the door. You never know. So knock on the door, and these two ladies, the mom and daughter, answer the door, and I'm like, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I used to live here when I was a little girl, and I'm stationed at Davis-Monthan now, and I was wondering if we could reminisce and come inside. And they were very kind. They were like, of course, come on in. So we go in, and that house was a lot smaller than yes, it was a 4-bedroom, but the rooms were small. It was a lot smaller than what I remember, but it was very awkward. I could tell the ladies wanted to ask me, and I didn't want to give anything away, because the thing about ghosts is that they will haunt certain people. And I think that it was so strong with us is because we were all spirit sensitives, And so it was feeding off of our energy. Not everybody is like that. And so I asked them, I said, how long have you been living here? And they said 2 years. I was like, 2 years? Wow. So the lady was talking about that back bedroom, and she said that she was moving her son into, we had a really large back patio. It was a covered back patio that had a shed that would face the house, but there was a shed. And she was saying how she was going to convert that shed into a bedroom for him. And in my head, I didn't ask her, but in my head, I'm like, well, why would you do that why would you do that when you have a perfectly good bedroom back there? Why aren't you using it? So I think they were experiencing some things. It just wasn't as strong as ours, I think. And, but it was kind of awkward. I could tell they wanted to ask me, but I didn't stay there very long. I was only there maybe 10, 15 minutes because I could feel it. I could feel it was still there, and I could feel that it was waking up. And I didn't want to bring a lot of trouble to the family. So I thanked them and we left. Got in the car and I looked at my uncle and I was like, did you feel that? And he was like, yeah, that was really, he goes, it's a good thing we left. So when we left, we went back to my aunt's house and we were talking about it. And I had mentioned it to my mom like a few years later, what we did. And so my mom is she has very strong spirit sensitivities. It's very strong. And she could have been a medium, like hers was strong. But her way of dealing with it was not to deal with it. She was very afraid of it. It scared her. She had many experiences when she was a kid that very much frightened her. And so she just didn't talk about it. But when I told her we went back to that house, she goes, don't ever go back to that house. And then she proceeds to tell me what happened to her in that house. And she said that it started with a baby crying, and it was right outside her window. And it was a baby crying. And that is one of the examples of demonic possession is babies. You can hear babies crying. And our neighbors didn't have babies. And she kept hearing this baby crying. And so she couldn't stand it. She was having a hard time sleeping. But the final straw was one night she was in bed and the baby started crying and it was right next to her in bed. She didn't see it, but she heard it, a baby crying. So she got up and she went and slept with grandma, her mom. And none of this was happening to anybody else, just her. So everything was fine and good. And then she started hearing the baby crying again. And this time grandma could hear it too. So it validated my mom that she wasn't losing her mind. And then mom told me that there was something about that room that made her feel safe. It was very serene. She never wanted to leave it. She didn't even want to leave it to go to get up to eat. She just wanted to lay in that bed forever. And it was almost like, it wasn't a sexual thing. It was very much like just a calmness and a serenity and a peace. There was no pain. There was no, you know, heartache or depression or anything like that. It was just a calmness that we all wish we had. And that's why she was losing weight, was because she wasn't getting up to eat. And the final straw was when my uncle got hit and we had to leave the house. My grandma had to forcibly remove her from the room to get her into the car, into the station wagon, and get her out of the house. And she fought grandma. She fought her, but she was so weak that grandma easily overpowered her. Grandma was like 5'7", 5'8". She was tall. She was kind of tall. I think she was 5'7". And here's my mom. She's like 4'11", 4'10". And she had lost weight. She was probably about 80 pounds at that time. So grandma easily overpowered her, got her in the station wagon, got her out of there. Within a few weeks of being back in Neosho, mom started healing. She was able, that blood disorder immediately went away. She was eating again. She was back to her normal self. But the house kind of possessed her in a way. And that was very scary. And she said she didn't want to talk about it because she was afraid it would follow us. She was afraid that it would come back if she acknowledged it, because it possessed her, basically. So yeah. So that house, I just looked online, and it's still there, but I see that it's been bought and sold many times. And I believe that it was so strong with us is because we all have ability in our family on my mom's side. And it's something that, it was crazy. It was crazy that happened. And it scarred us all. It made us all very afraid. I do have fear. I have several examples, stories of ghost stories that I will tell you over time. But I know this was probably uncomfortable, but this is my story, and this really happened. It really did. So yeah, that's my story. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you. Take care and be well. Bye-bye.